But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly.
In his emotionally charged final speech on April 3, 1968, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. courageously challenged America to live up to its ideals.
That the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
As the nation marks the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, his message of equal justice for all remains as relevant today.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead.
Up until that time, up until Jimmy Carter, the United States had done some pretty terrible things. The whole nation was sick in many ways, and still is. In fact, we seem to want to go back to that time.
This battle.
Andrew Young, one of Dr. King's principal lieutenants, a civil rights icon himself, often marching alongside Dr. King, was with him in Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. Battling a high fever, Dr. King decided to stay in bed and send Young and others in his place.
What changed his mind? He was sick, wasn't feeling well, but he decided to go on.
He decided to go on because it was pouring down rain, and that church holds 11,000 people, and it was overflowed, and they were all out in the streets. And so we got him up out of his sickbed, with a fever, to come down. And what he said was, I really don't feel up to it, but Ralph, you go ahead and speak, and I'll just make a few remarks.
Dr. King said more than just a few words, his sermon resonating with mistreated sanitation workers who had taken on the slogan, I am a man, a precursor to today's Black Lives Matter slogan.
As you look at the world today, what part for you stands out about that speech?
Well, it was the fact that he did it, and the fact that he knew that it was probably his last speech.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now.
The day before, he had sent his sermon title back to his secretary at Ebenezer Church. And the sermon title that was going to preach the Sunday, if he had lived, was Why America Might Go to Hell. So he had no illusions.
I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
And the way he'd make us deal with it, he'd say, okay, I know they after me, but you all always around trying to get your picture taken, and one of you all going to take a bullet for me, but don't worry, I'll preach you into heaven.
Just one day after his mountaintop speech, the 39-year-old beloved civil rights leader was shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. Civil rights organizer and confidant to Dr. King and his wife Coretta, Xernona Clayton, recalls being given the sad news while at dinner.
The maid of Dieu knew me very well and knew I had a relationship with the Kings, and so she came over and put a note on there. Did you hear about Dr. King? Well, I didn't know at the time what she meant, so I just kind of folded the note up and kept talking. Then she came back again because she thought that was odd behavior, and she said, I hate to interrupt, but did you hear that something happened to him? And I said, no. And I thought I'd better go to the phone and check it out. Because, see, I had driven him to the airport but 2 days before.
The 85-year-old Young doesn't understand why people so often focus on the shooting itself.
Why you want to look at that moment, though? Why don't you look at the moment where he decided to go to Memphis? We focused on the mountaintop speech. See, we focused on the night before his death, and that's what we have focused on.
Everyone else has always talked about the day he was killed.
Well, maybe not, because nobody wants to talk about the day he was killed, because there are all kinds of questions about who was responsible for it, and nobody wants to face those. So,
who was responsible?
It's not my business. My business was to keep the movement going. See? And I was a member of Congress, and they wanted me to serve on the committee to investigate the assassination. I said, no, we don't care who pulled the trigger. We know what killed Martin Luther King. What killed Martin Luther King was the reactionary selfishness and racism.
And this may
Instead, Young likes to reflect on the playful moments he shared with Dr. King just before he was murdered.
I had been in court, and I went back to talk to him, and he jumped on me. And
was that at the Lorraine Hotel?
Yeah, and started picking on me, saying, where you been all day? You've been slipping off. We working. And I said, look, I was in court. You didn't call me. You didn't call me. I said, but I was on the witness stand. See? And he said, yeah, but you should have sent me a message. I'm supposed to know what's going on. And I said, oh, come on. You all have been here eating catfish and clowning, and I've been trying to keep this movement going, and you all going to pick on me? And he said, you talking back to me? And I said, well, and next thing I know, he was picking up a pillow. See, throwing it at me. And I threw it back. See? And then all of them grabbed pillows. And it was like a bunch of, 10-year-olds. Because, they were standing on top of the bed, and they finally beat me down between the two beds, and piled all the pillows on top of me because I was insubordinate. I was talking back to the elders. See, and so, but then somebody knocked on the door and reminded us that we had to go to dinner. And 10 minutes later, he was dead.
President Carter led the prolonged applause in the White House East Room for the swearing in of Andrew Young to be the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
The former ambassador to the UN, U.S. congressman, and mayor of Atlanta is pleased Dr. King's legacy still lives on half a century later, along with the legacies of many other leaders who gathered, marched, and fought for rights. Protests now are different, Young says. He feels young people expect too much out of the world.
And I think part of the problem with young people is they expect the world to be right. We were taught that this world is almost hell on earth. And I was trained, I was given lessons in how to deal with evil from 4 years old. Because the Nazi party was living on the corner of my house, 50 yards from where I was born. Highland Hitler, 1936. Now, kids feeling like they have a right to be angry and bitter and militant. My daddy, at 4 years old, told me that was stupid and that will get you killed.
People often ask me, if Dr. King came back now, what would he say? I said, I think he'd walk in here and said, you all haven't solved that problem yet. And because he saw a solution that we had to have brotherly love. We've got to learn how to get along. We've got to learn how to live together. We've got to get rid of hatred and bigotry.
And honoring those principles, Clayton believes, is the greatest tribute to the memory of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the movement he led more than 1/2 century ago.
So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.